He adjusted his tie in the reflection of the polished brass elevator doors. Elijah Brooks had never been a man who cared much about appearances, but today felt different. The invitation in his breast pocket, hand-delivered by his son the night before, carried more weight than any paper he'd held in his life. Jordan had said it proudly, "You're not just invited, Dad. You're the guest of honor." So Elijah had worn the same navy blue suit he wore to Jordan's Harvard graduation. It was a little tighter now around the waist, a little shinier at the elbows, but it still carried the same dignity, the same pride stitched into every seam. The Langford estate stood like a monument to exclusivity. Limestone columns, glass chandeliers, white marble floors that gleamed like ice. Elijah had seen places like this on TV, never in person. But he walked in with his back straight, his eyes steady. He wasn't here to be impressed. He was here to witness his son's greatest achievement, the signing of a billion-dollar merger between Brooks Logistics and the Langford Empire. It was the culmination of decades of sacrifice, long nights, and 3-job years. It was the moment every parent dreams of. He didn't make it past the front desk. "Excuse me, sir," said a woman in a crisp black blazer standing behind a gold-rimmed reception podium. Her voice was sharp, practiced. "Deliveries and staff enter through the back entrance." "I'm going to have to ask you," Elijah blinked. "I'm sorry, you're with catering or janitorial, correct?" He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out the gold-edged invitation. "No, ma'am. I'm Elijah Brooks. I'm here for my son's event." She barely glanced at the card. "Sir, I've been instructed." That's when she appeared. Margaret Langford floated across the marble floor like a queen inspecting her court. She was elegance wrapped in malice ivory heels, clicking with intention, a silk blouse the color of cold steel. She gave Elijah a long, sweeping look top to bottom, like assessing damage at a garage sale, and then smiled, all teeth, no warmth. "Let me guess," she purred. "You must be the new gardener." A chuckle rippled from a nearby group of men in suits. One of them murmured, "Or the driver, maybe," took a wrong turn. Elijah felt the heat crawl up his neck, but his face remained still. He had spent 40 years in boardrooms where no one remembered his name, 40 years having to be twice as good just to be considered equal. This was nothing new, but still this time it hurt. This time it wasn't just about him. It was about his son. "I'm Elijah Brooks," he said calmly, "father of Jordan Brooks, CEO of Brooks Logistics." Margaret clapped her hands slowly, mockingly. How sweet. The boy brought his daddy to see how adults do business. Laughter again. But not from everyone. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. A few looked down at their phones. One woman bit her lip, but none spoke. Across the room, Jordan stood frozen. He hadn't noticed his father enter, not at first. But now, watching the scene unfold, it was like watching a nightmare he thought he'd outgrown. The ballroom, the clinking glasses, the forced smiles, it all blurred, except for that single image, his father standing alone in a sea of contempt. He remembered this feeling. The cold throb in his chest, the helpless rage. He'd felt it at 7 when a teacher told Elijah to wait outside the classroom so we can speak with real parents. He'd felt it at 14 watching his father fall asleep at the kitchen table. Red pens still in hand, eyes sunken from triple shifts. And he felt it now more powerfully than ever before. Elijah didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. And that stillness, that quiet strength was the final thing that broke Jordan's composure. He stepped forward, crossed the ballroom with the slow, purposeful stride of a man who had just made a decision he could never walk back. He placed his hand gently on his father's shoulder and looked Margaret Langford in the eye. "This man," he said, voice calm but firm, "taught me that dignity can't be bought and power doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from the way you treat people when no one's watching." A silence fell over the room, not the awkward kind, the reverent kind. Jordan held his father's gaze for a moment longer, then whispered just loud enough for Margaret to hear, "We won't be doing business today." And just like that, the balance shifted. Not with a shout, not with a threat, with the simple, irrevocable decision of a man who knew his worth and refused to forget where he came from. Jordan didn't say another word as he led his father out of the ballroom. He didn't look back at the sea of stunned faces or the silent cameras that had caught every moment. The heavy doors shut behind them with a quiet finality, like the end of a chapter he'd never wanted to write. The limousine was waiting outside, but neither of them moved toward it right away. Elijah stood still for a long moment beneath the estate's massive stone archway, staring at the sky as if trying to breathe something in, or maybe let something go. Inside the car, the silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. Jordan's jaw clenched. Elijah looked out the window, his reflection merging with the rolling trees beyond. Finally, Jordan spoke. "You okay?" Elijah didn't answer right away. Then with a small exhale, he said, "That wasn't new, son. Just older than you know." Jordan looked down at his hands. He remembered those moments now like echoes rising through time. How many school functions had Elijah stood in the back, unacknowledged, mistaken for a janitor, or ignored altogether? How many times had Jordan pretended not to notice the looks, the ones that said, "He can't be your father"? Not dressed like that, not from that neighborhood. He'd buried those memories beneath layers of success, sharp suits, polished boardrooms. But they'd never really left. They had just waited. He was 7 when it first cut deep. His class had hosted a Parents in Careers Day, and Elijah had shown up in his work shirt collar, a little worn, carrying an old leather briefcase. The other dads, lawyers, architects, investors, had crisp suits and firm handshakes. When Elijah introduced himself as an accountant, a few of them blinked, clearly confused. One whispered, "For who?" Elijah had smiled through it. Jordan had stayed quiet the entire day. He was 15 when it hurt the most. They'd needed a down payment for his first delivery truck, and Elijah had sold his car. Jordan hadn't understood then why his father walked to work through rain, wind, and winter. He only saw the truck. Only later would he realize what that kind of love costs a man's body and what it buys for his child's future. Those memories rushed through him now, stitching the past to the present. And beneath them, something new was rising, not rage, not pride, but resolve. "Dad," Jordan said, his voice low. "They picked the wrong day to test us." Elijah turned to look at him. "Jordan?" Walking away was the right thing. "I know," Jordan replied, nodding. "But walking away isn't the only thing I'm going to do." There was no anger in his voice, just clarity. He pulled out his phone and opened a secure folder labeled Langford Research. For months, he'd been quietly gathering information, background checks, whistleblower reports, sealed settlements. He'd never expected to use it. It was insurance, the kind no one ever wants to cash in. But now it was something else entirely. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You were ready," Jordan met his father's eyes. "Not for that, not for you being the one they did it to. But I knew something was off. I've been doing due diligence since the day we sat down at their table." The car turned off the highway, heading back toward the city. As the skyline emerged in the distance, Jordan tapped out a message to Alicia Kim. "Need you at HQ. Bring everything. And Marcus. Time to move." He hit send, then closed his eyes for a beat. "Dad," he said quietly, "I need you to trust me now more than ever." Elijah studied him for a long second, and then with a half smile tinged in sadness, he nodded. "I do, son. I always have." The city lights grew brighter as they approached Manhattan, each one like a pinprick in the darkness, steady and unblinking. And somewhere between memory and momentum, Jordan Brooks began to calculate. Not just revenge, not just justice, something deeper, something lasting, something that would change everything. By the time they reached the Brooks Logistics headquarters, an angular glass tower rising over the East River, the decision had already crystallized in Jordan's mind. He didn't need more time to think or space to cool off. What had happened at the Langford estate wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration. And he planned to respond not with outrage, not with spectacle, but with precision. The executive floor was quiet, the city humming low beneath them as dusk settled in. Jordan walked straight to the conference room at the far end of the hall, the one with the panoramic view of Midtown. He flicked on the lights, revealing the long walnut table, the screen on the far wall, and 3 empty leather chairs. Within 15 minutes, they were filled. Alicia Kim arrived first, hair pulled back, heels, clicking a folder already in hand. She didn't need a briefing. One look at Jordan's face told her everything. She dropped the folder on the table, leaned in, and said, "Tell me what happened." "They made it personal," Jordan replied. Behind her came Marcus Chen, former FBI investigator turned corporate intelligence consultant. He carried 2 laptop bags and a cardboard box marked Archive A. His tone, unlike Alicia's, was clipped and neutral. "We pulling the trigger?" Jordan nodded once. "All of it." Marcus gave a small, knowing smile and began unloading files onto the table. 6 months of background checks, leaked memos, confidential settlements. It's ugly. Alicia sat across from Jordan and opened the folder. Inside were names, photos, summaries. A black engineer fired after asking why no one of color had ever made VP. A woman forced out after reporting harassment by a white manager. Quiet payouts, confidentiality agreements, patterns of exclusion dressed in HR language. Jordan's voice was steady as he flipped through the documents. "I didn't expect it to be my father, but I knew they'd slip. Arrogance doesn't hide forever." Alicia nodded slowly. "And you were right to gather all this. But are you sure about your next step? Walking away from a billion-dollar merger is one thing. Going to war with a billionaire dynasty? I'm not going to war," Jordan said. "I'm going to hold up a mirror. If they don't like what they see that's on them." Marcus tapped his laptop. "We also found sealed settlements from 2010 and 2012, racial discrimination, workplace retaliation, all hidden behind NDA walls. But the patterns are undeniable, and I've got 7 former employees ready to break their silence." Jordan leaned back in his chair. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed against him. The cost, the risk, the sheer scale of what they were about to do. But then he remembered the look in his father's eyes, quiet pride, unwavering dignity, and a glint of pain he hadn't seen in years. "I don't want revenge," Jordan said quietly. "I want accountability. I want every child who's ever watched their parent be humiliated to see that we don't have to swallow it quietly anymore." Alicia smiled, something fierce flashing in her eyes. "Then let's give them something they can't ignore." They began laying out the plan, a press strategy, a legal roadmap, a carefully timed series of disclosures, and most importantly, leverage. Jordan wouldn't just blow the deal apart. He'd walk into their territory, Langford Estate, same time, same table, and flip the terms of power on its head. Not with rage, not with vengeance, but with facts, strategy, and the moral weight of a man who knew his father had never once bent under pressure and wouldn't start now. Outside the windows, the city shimmered under the night sky. Jordan turned toward the skyline and whispered to no one in particular. They thought they were buying a business. What they did was awaken something I've been preparing for my whole life. And behind him, Alicia and Marcus kept building the case page by page, truth by truth. The clock was ticking. The next day he would walk into Langford Estate not as a partner, but as a reckoning wrapped in a tailored suit. Morning came wrapped in clouds, the kind that sat low over the skyline like a warning. Jordan stood alone in his office, the same navy blue suit draped over his shoulders, the one he'd worn to yesterday's humiliation. Not to reclaim it, not out of sentiment, but to send a message I don't forget. He picked up the leather briefcase waiting by the door. Inside wasn't a contract, not anymore. Just truth bound in paper and numbers. At exactly 11:00 a.m., the Langford Estate buzzed with photographers, lawyers, and financiers. Champagne flutes clinked. A red carpet led to a signing table carved from mahogany older than most of the guests. Margaret Langford stood near the fireplace, regal in cream, giving air kisses and confident smiles. She looked radiant, like someone who believed the storm had already passed. Then she saw him. Jordan entered without fanfare, without entourage. Just him, the briefcase, and a presence that made conversations falter and heads turn. For a moment, Margaret's mask slipped. Just for a second, but she caught it quickly. "I knew you'd come back," she said, smile sharpening. "People like you always do. Reality has a way of humbling idealists." Jordan gave a polite nod and walked to the table. He placed the briefcase down, carefully unlatched it, and pulled out an envelope. Margaret frowned. "What's this?" "I brought an agreement," Jordan said. "Just not the one you expected." He slid the envelope across the table. When she opened it, a stack of photographs spilled out. Faces, names, dismissal letters, settlement documents. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. Richard Langford stepped forward, puffing on a cigar. "What is this nonsense? You think waving a few old HR files around will—" "I'm not waving anything," Jordan said calmly. "I'm presenting facts. These are 7 former employees, Black, Latino, female, who signed non-disclosure agreements after experiencing discrimination at Langford companies. Margaret's voice grew sharp. You have no right to access this. I do, Jordan interrupted. They contacted me. This morning they agreed to speak publicly. He turned and connected his laptop to the projector. A spreadsheet illuminated the wall, 15 years of HR data. 0 black executives. A 3-to-1 termination ratio for non-white employees. Salary gaps. Complaint logs with no recorded action. Math doesn't lie, he said softly. A murmur swelled through the room. Phones came out. A few cameras clicked. Then came the voice no one expected, Margaret's, echoing from the speakers. There's probably gardening work out back if you're looking for a job. Followed by Richard's laugh. Margaret froze. You recorded me. That's illegal. It was a public venue, Jordan replied, surrounded by witnesses. But that's just the appetizer. Right on cue, the doors opened, and Alicia Kim entered, flanked by a court officer and a legal assistant, wheeling a second briefcase. Margaret. Richard, Alicia said, voice clear, firm. I represent 7 plaintiffs in a class action suit for racial discrimination, hostile work environments, and wrongful termination. We are seeking $50 million in damages. Margaret staggered back a step. Richard's cigar slipped from his hand. You're destroying your career, she hissed. Jordan met her gaze, cool and unwavering. No, I'm destroying the illusion that you can humiliate people and never be held accountable, Alicia added. In 5 minutes, every media outlet in this room will receive a digital dossier complete with timelines, financials, and testimony. And we haven't even mentioned the sealed settlement from the 2010 defense contract scandal. Jordan stepped forward, voice still calm. This was never just about a deal. This was about drawing a line in public between those who build legacies and those who hide behind them. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was consequence. Margaret stood rooted, her world tilting as the truth unfurled around her like a storm she couldn't outrun. Jordan, briefcase in hand, turned to the press. You wanted a merger, he said, but what you needed was a mirror. And with that, he walked out, not to applause, but to something far louder, the sound of a kingdom cracking under the weight of its own arrogance. The headlines hit before Jordan even stepped into the elevator. Langford dynasty rocked by discrimination scandal. CEO Jordan Brooks walks away from $1 billion deal with receipts. Billionaire family humiliates a black father and pays the price. By the time he returned to his office, the media storm was already in full swing. Reporters were camped outside Brooks Logistics. Stock analysts were scrambling. Whispers turned to waves. But Jordan wasn't watching the chaos. He was focused on what came next. Inside the war room, once a quiet strategy space, now lit up like mission control. Alicia and Marcus were fielding calls, scanning legal responses, and monitoring press coverage. 7 former employees had gone public that morning, each with a statement, each breaking silence they'd carried for years. And one of them, a soft-spoken engineer named Roberto, had ended his statement with just 5 words. He made me feel seen. Jordan sat down quietly, taking it all in. And then his phone rang. The screen read, Evan Langford. He hesitated, then answered. There was a pause, then Evan's voice came through, low and sure. I saw the news. I think it's time we talk. Jordan didn't say much, just told him to come by. No lawyers, no cameras. An hour later, Evan walked into the conference room looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 24 hours. No tailored suit, just jeans, a wrinkled shirt, and eyes too tired for someone barely in his 30s. He sat across from Jordan, silent for a long beat. My family's not ready to face this, Evan said finally. But I am. Jordan nodded once. I figured you might be. Evan let out a breath. We're bleeding. Our board's frozen the merger. Investors are jumping ship. And my father, he's not well. I'm sorry to hear that, Jordan said, meaning it. But this isn't just about your family anymore. Evan nodded. I know. That's why I want to ask, is there a way out of this? Jordan studied him for a moment, then leaned forward. There's no going back, but there might be a way forward. He slid a document across the table. It wasn't glossy, it wasn't thick, just a short acquisition proposal, clear, sharp, and devastatingly fair. Brooks Logistics will buy the operational assets of Langford Industries, Jordan said. 40 cents on the dollar. We'll keep the teams. We'll scrap the culture. Evan's mouth parted slightly. "You're buying us out. I'm offering you a soft landing," Jordan replied. "You keep the homes, the personal accounts, a modest income. Or you let it all burn in court." Evan was silent. Then he looked up. "Why are you even offering this after what they did to your father?" Jordan didn't hesitate. "Because my father didn't raise me to burn things down. He raised me to build, and to never mistake vengeance for vision." A long silence followed. Then Evan extended his hand. "I'll talk to the board. You'll have an answer in 48 hours. Jordan shook his hand, firm but steady. As Evan turned to leave, he paused at the door. "You know, when my mother mocked your dad, she said he should try gardening." Jordan glanced up. "Yeah, I remember." Evan gave a faint, tired smile. "Funny, he's about to own the land she insulted him on." Jordan smiled too, but not with triumph, with something quieter, something heavier. The smile of a man who had waited his whole life for a moment like this, and now felt its full weight. After Evan left, Jordan returned to the window, looking out over the city. Below, people bustled, lives moved on, stories unfolded that would never make the news. But somewhere in that hum, he felt it, the shift, the quiet rewriting of power. And this time the pen was in his hands. 48 hours passed like the steady ticking of a clock counting down the end of an era. Evan called just after sunrise. His voice was quiet, almost hoarse. "We're signing. My parents, they won't say it out loud, but they know it's over." Jordan didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He simply said, "You made the right choice." 6 months later, the Langford estate no longer bore the weight of its old name. The grand stone archway had been recast in bronze, with new letters embedded into its curve, Brooks Community Center. What was once an exclusive stronghold of wealth and privilege had transformed into something entirely different, open, pulsing with energy, purpose, and second chances. Inside, the chandelier-lit ballroom no longer held gala fundraisers or exclusive brandy tastings. Instead, rows of music stands and folding chairs filled the space where a group of Black and Latino teenagers were learning to play Beethoven's Fifth. Laughter echoed through the marble halls. Chalkboards replaced cigar lounges. The scent of fresh soil drifted in through the open side doors where a new garden had taken root. And there, in the very patch of land where Margaret Langford once mocked him, Elijah Brooks knelt in the soil, teaching a group of middle schoolers how to plant rose bushes. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, dirt under his fingernails, sun on his face. When Jordan walked up behind him, smiling, Elijah didn't look up right away. "Remember what she said?" Dad, Jordan asked, nodding toward the garden. "About you looking for a gardening job." Elijah chuckled softly, standing up and brushing off his hands. "She was right. I was looking. I just didn't know it would be here." They stood side by side, surveying the space where contempt had once grown wild, now cultivated into something far greater. The transformation wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about replacement, replacing exclusion with opportunity, arrogance with growth. Jordan turned back toward the building, where a group of young adults were sitting in a career workshop, led by a former Langford executive now employed by Brooks Logistics under new leadership. The company had not just survived the scandal, it had flourished. 3 major corporations had reached out, impressed by Jordan's ethical stand. Strategic partnerships bloomed like spring after frost. The workforce grew past 5,000 turn. More than 70% came from underrepresented backgrounds. They weren't hired as a gesture. They were hired because the company believed they belonged at the table. Across town, Victoria Langford was nowhere to be found. She hadn't spoken to the press in months. Rumors swirled about her retreat from public life. Her invitations were gone. Her club memberships canceled. Even her stylist refused to take her calls. Richard Langford now lived in a modest beach house in Florida, surviving on what was left after the asset sale. He rarely left home. Not out of shame, he didn't seem to possess that, but because no one cared to hear him speak anymore. And Evan, he took his portion of the sale and founded an anti-discrimination nonprofit, quietly, without press. He didn't do it to cleanse his name. He did it because, for once, he listened. His voice in a televised interview cracked when he said, "My family caused harm for generations. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm trying to build something better with what's left." Alicia Kim had become a minority partner in Brooks Logistics, now leading the company's ethics and compliance division. She often joked in board meetings, "Best hostile takeover in corporate history." And Jordan would smirk because he knew it had never been about hostility. It had been about correction. One morning at a small press event in a Brooklyn high school, Jordan was asked, "What's your proudest moment in all this?" He looked out at the crowd, at the students, the teachers, at Elijah, standing quietly in the back, and said, "My father taught me that success isn't how far you rise, but how many you bring with you." That's what we're doing now, one person at a time. As applause filled the room, Elijah's eyes shimmered. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the man at the back of the room. He felt exactly where he belonged. The applause faded slowly, but the feeling lingered, warm, steady, like something settling into place after years of imbalance. Elijah stepped outside into the early spring light, hands still stained faintly with soil from that morning's garden session. He didn't mind. These were the marks of legacy, not labor. Behind him, students poured from the auditorium, buzzing with excitement, not over Jordan's title or his company's worth, but because they'd seen someone who looked like them refuse to bend to power and still win. Word of what Brooks Logistics had built spread far beyond boardrooms. Universities began assigning the Brooks case in business ethics courses. The story wasn't framed as a scandal, but as a turning point, a case study in moral leverage. In what happens when dignity stands its ground and speaks with data, poise, and principle, Jordan had become something more than a CEO. Not a symbol exactly. Symbols are cold. He was proof that success and conscience didn't have to live on opposite ends of the spectrum. And that proof was being whispered everywhere. In community centers, in late-night barbershop conversations, in first-year business lectures. "You know what Jordan Brooks did" became the opening line to a story passed between generations. As for the Langfords, they disappeared not dramatically, just quietly. Their absence from social columns was louder than any confession. Victoria never apologized. She didn't write a memoir, didn't give a redemption interview. She simply vanished into irrelevance. And somehow that felt more final than any public downfall. The world didn't need to punish her. It had already moved on. 1 year to the day after the failed merger, Jordan stood beneath the same bronze archway, now freshly polished, and cut the ribbon to open the 10th Brooks Community Center in Chicago. The sun was out, the crowd was big, and Elijah stood right beside him just as he always had. He was 65 now, a little slower on the stairs, but sharper than ever. The same hands Margaret Langford once mocked now signed grant approvals, sketched garden layouts, and when no one was looking, offered tired kids a quiet pat on the shoulder and a whispered, "I see you." After the ribbon fell, Jordan leaned toward his father. "Can you believe this?" he asked. Elijah looked around. Dozens of teens, parents, musicians, volunteers, even former Langford employees, now proudly wearing Brooks name badges. Then he smiled soft and simple. "I can," he said, "because I saw what it cost." Later that evening, Jordan received a national award for ethical business leadership. On stage, he didn't talk about profits or growth charts. Instead, he turned to where Elijah sat in the front row, flanked by Alicia Kim and Roberto Silva, and said, "My father taught me that true power isn't about who you control, it's about who you lift. And the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a world where their cruelty becomes irrelevant." In the audience, Elijah wiped his eyes. Not out of sadness, but out of knowing. The kind of knowing that comes from decades of quiet sacrifice now given voice. From planting seeds no one saw then living long enough to watch them bloom. Outside, the city moved as always. Fast, noisy, relentless. But somewhere in the noise, a new frequency was humming. One built not on fear, but on legacy. And for the first time, Elijah Brooks didn't have to wonder if his story mattered. It already had. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in justice, legacy, and doing the right thing no matter the cost. Thank you for watching.